This definitely takes unboxing to a different place. You gonna eat that? What is up, you beautiful humans? Yes, today we're gonna be talking about the iPhone SE2, the second iteration of the iPhone SE. This is the first iPhone that I have brought into my possession and into my workflow to give it a run, to give it a try, to test this thing out. So I have actually stood by the Android phones when it comes to the first Google phones, then it pivoted over to the Nexus, and then Pixel came out. But then I ended up moving over to the OnePlus line, which I really love the OnePlus line of phones. They have been fantastic. But what I will tell you is that I have not had an iOS device. My kids have them, my wife has it, and we've purchased them, but for me, I've stood Android all the way. So I just want to get that out of the way. However, I also want to let you know that I am a Mac OS user and I've been there for a long time. So I want to try to give you as much of a middle of the road perspective here. I do have videos coming out on the channel that is going to be testing this camera out. I've already done some initial tests with this camera, but really pushing what this thing can do when it comes to filmmaking, photography, editing that footage even on this phone, starting a podcast on this phone. So stay tuned for those things. Be sure to subscribe because I'm going to be bringing more of that onto the channel. And I'm not really the first one to say it, but I will get on the wagon to say that this is probably going to be one of the hottest phones of this year. And I'll tell you what, if anybody's got a receipt for 2019, and if we could take 2020 back and get 2019 back in here, at least like the first part of 2019, because I thought that was a pretty good year myself. But anyway, all jokes aside, I do think that this is going to be one of the most talked about phones compared to phones, and people really going nuts over this. Now, looking at what Apple has been doing and listening to the consumer, and even the consumer that's the higher level, like prosumer level, but also people who are interested in getting into the ecosystem, Apple has had their ear to the rail for a while. And I know that many of you might say like, yeah, you could put a piece of crapple in a box and great logo and it's got Apple on it and people are just gonna fall in love with it. Let's talk about this for a moment. Apple is smart. It's a $1 trillion company. They figured this thing out. And yeah, there was quite a while there where people were just buying the stuff up, putting themselves into debt and figuring out ways to get the latest iPhone because they just kept getting more and more expensive with very limited features as far as like upgrades. Fast forward to like the last year, really the last 6 months, Apple has started to listen to even the prosumers, introducing the MacBook Pro 16-inch. When it comes to graphic design and video and audio editing, that thing screams. And it actually didn't go up in price. The iPhone 11, when I was shopping for iPhones for my kids, and I was really surprised that at that entry point at $699, I thought that was fairly reasonable because Apple had only had options that were around $1,000 or more. So hovering around that. So they're starting to move into that space where they're understanding that they want to get people in there. Like they've reached a limit. Like they have started to max out on what they can do here. So keeping something like this around is a smart play. It's the same thing with the MacBook Air and the same thing with the Mac Mini. Some of you might think like, especially like when you're looking spec for spec and you're like, I can get so much more for so much less. But if it's an entry point to get people into the ecosystem, it just makes sense. So with the reheated leftover idea of the iPhone 8, and we've sprinkled a little extra something in there with the A13 chipset. So it makes those leftovers taste a little less leftover. However, let's actually talk about that for a second. Let's talk about the chipset that is pretty much in the same iPhone 8 case. As an example, I am shooting with the Sony a6400 right now. I have right here the Sony a6500. Now the 6400 was not supposed to be a successor of the 6500, but that is a newer camera, that one. These have the exact same sensors in them, but the 6400 has an updated chipset. Now, what I can tell you from use case here, not just like specs and, you know, Geekbench this and that, like actual using it, I am getting more from that camera when it comes to the sensor than the 6500. Doesn't mean that the 6500 is a bad camera. It's a great camera, but the chipset has offered me a little bit more when it comes to what I'm trying to get out of my equipment. So when we talk about the iPhone camera module, yeah, sounds like it's the same based on the teardowns that I've seen, but it also, we're getting some increased functionality, some increased ability with the chipset, because a lot of this stuff is based on that type of ability to do it in the software. So with the camera's capabilities of shooting 4K up to 60 frames, and I can't even do that on these cameras. I can't shoot 4K up to 60 frames. And then of course doing 1080p at up to 240 frames. I can't do that on these cameras. But granted, there are some limitations and things that happen in the software, and it's not just Apple, but these manufacturers are doing that, putting it in the software to make, wow, those images look really sharp, but it's because they're doing something in the software to saturate certain things and have deeper blacks, and those kinds of things make the picture look sharper or better. But what I'm trying to speak to is that this isn't supposed to replace this, but this can help you get into something like this. If this is your only device that you have, that's a phone that accesses the internet, that has all this functionality, and you can still take pictures and do video with it, even podcast with it, and do so many other things with it, $399, a one and done, smart move. Now for all of you thinking about the specs when it comes to the RAM, 3 gigs of RAM here, I got a almost 4-year-old, pretty much 4-year-old phone here that has twice the RAM that this does. But ecosystem, hardware and the software. It's all manufactured or at least produced and R&D'd and done under the same umbrella. So Apple's figured out, this is what we need. This is, everybody's thinking spec for spec, the RAM and the processors, but Apple knows this is what we need to put in the phone. We don't need more. Many people might be asking for more, but you have to ask yourself, what do you need out of your phone? What do you need out of your computers? That MacBook Pro behind me, 2017, it's a dual core. I can cut 4K video on it with no problem. I do have an external graphics card set up if I need it, and I do use it, but I don't have to. I can cut 4K footage on that MacBook Pro just fine because I'm using Apple's Final Cut Pro. Everything is working together well. Now it's funny because my kids asked about the pure size of it. They were kind of joking to me, Dad, how are you going to get used to a phone that's so small? And quite frankly, I love the EDC aspects of this. I love the fact that I can just shove this thing in the pocket and I've got a couple of other things that I can, put in there, no worries. And then at the end of the day, when I am putting my phone away, it fits into this little case that sits up on the dresser, no problem, no Face ID. I'm fine with that. We're all apparently going to be wearing masks for quite some time. And I actually use my Touch ID on these phones. The fingerprint sensors on the phones, I've been using that for years. And so the Touch ID, I love it. I'm fine with it. When it comes to charging, this is a Chotec wireless charger that I've had since the Nexus line of phones when you could wirelessly charge your phone. And here's the thing, I've been wirelessly charging my phones before iPhone could use it. I have been using Google Pay when it was actually Android Pay and maybe something before that, before you were using Apple Pay. Granted, there were only a few places that took it. So I understand trying to be on the bleeding edge of that technology. But what I will tell you is that I realize coming from something like this, and I'm going to get all day usage out of, no problem, and still have quite a bit of battery life, versus something like this, where I have had to either connect it to a charger at the end of the day, and still needed to use it a little bit more, or have used it based on what was happening that day and maybe had 3, 4, 5% left in the battery. And I understand that everybody has a different use case. What I will tell you though, is that I haven't charged this thing in 5 days. Right now I'm running at 33%, but let me tell you, let me preface, is that I've shot some occasional 4K footage. I've done some work on the camera. I've uploaded some things. I've downloaded some things. I have updated software. I've done some speed tests. So I've picked the phone up at least on the daily doing some things and then put it back and not really used it much. But as far as 5 days ago that I charged it and I still got 33% on it, that's awesome. And that's the thing with the chipset. So with the A6400, These have the exact same batteries and pretty much the exact same body, and for the most part, pretty much the same. But the chipset offers a better battery life experience in the 6400. I get anywhere from 15 to 20 and sometimes as much as 25% better battery life in that camera versus the A6500. And again, I realize this is a phone, it's not a camera, it's always on, it's always pulling from the Wi-Fi, and it's always LTE this or taking calls, or I get that. But what I'm telling you is that I believe that we are gonna see at least some slight improvements over the iPhone 8. People are still researching that. I'm still researching that. But when it comes to your daily use, you just have to think about, are you gonna be next to a charger or a wall plug, or you've got a wireless this or that, or how much do you use your phone? And is that gonna be a limitation? What are your thoughts when it comes to a $399 entry point into the ecosystem? Is this just some other crapple that went into the box and people are just gonna eat it up because now it's also a low price point, but somebody figured out like, hey, we'll just resell like a phone that we've already been making for a while. And of course, that's the point. They figured out the R&D, the tooling and the manufacturing. They have streamlined the process. So it just makes sense. I'm gonna be pushing the tech that's inside of here and using some lenses from Moment, so definitely stay tuned for that. As always, you go out there and do those things that matter. You keep rocking those faces. I'm gonna keep creating some content here, some value, some entertainment, whatever that is. I really appreciate your time and attention. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I will catch you on the next one.